this actually all about? And what does it mean for us? And that's what I was going to talk about today. I was going to talk about understanding the modern left. And if you were to set off into the world right now on a mission to understand the modern left, I think the first and most logical question you would ask yourself is you would say, what exactly are their principles? Because they don't talk about that a lot. What we tend to get from the left is a whole flood of policy proposals that the federal government needs to provide free health care, apparently for the entire population of planet Earth, that we need some kind of a genocide against flatulating cows, and on it goes, but you're still wondering, what are the principles behind all of this? It's an important question. Also, probably the easiest question of the day, because there aren't any. The first thing you need to understand if you want to understand the modern left is they don't have principles. Not at all. And that's not a punchline. I'm trying to make a very precise point. Let us take a moment and make sure we understand what the word principle means. A principle is not the same thing as a belief. There's an old joke, everybody has to believe in something. I believe I'll have another beer. And that might be what you believe, but it's not a principle. Do you know what makes something a principle? Is that it applies, glad you asked, is that it applies to everybody all the time. If it doesn't apply to everybody all the time, it may be what you fancy at the moment, but it's not a principle. Would you like an example?
Yeah.
The 10 Commandments are principles. Do you know why? They apply to everybody all the time. They're thousands of years old, and yet they've never been any more relevant. I don't know anybody who's exempt, and neither do you. They're principles. The left does not have principles. So if you are, as I am, I guess I've become a kind of a student of the left, you find interesting things like this. The modern left, and I think probably the better term is the university left, got its start on the college campuses in the mid-60s, right here in California, originally as a free speech movement. That is to say, the original incarnation of the hard left on the college campuses called itself a free speech movement, which I think is fascinating because those same people grew up and now they run the universities, and the universities are the least free speechy place in the entire country. Well, which is it? Are they for free speech or are they against free speech? And to ask the question is to demonstrate that you still don't understand the left. They're for free speech when it's their speech, and they're against free speech when it's anybody else's speech, because speech was never a principle, it was a tactic. You know what a tactic is, right? It's something you use to achieve a particular objective, and you throw it out the window as soon as you're done with it. They have lots of tactics, they just don't have principles. You know what the latest hot trend in American college campuses is? It's all the rage. Segregated dormitories for black kids. In a survey about a year ago, 42% of American universities today boast of racially segregated dormitories. 22% have racially segregated graduation ceremonies. And a whole flood of questions floods into my head, like, didn't we go through this before? It's like we've been here before. It was a colossally bad idea, and I distinctly remember the left being against segregation. But they weren't. They were against other people's segregation. When they do it, now it's a good thing, which is one of the signs that you don't have any principles. People with principles try to figure out what's the right thing to do and do it. People without principles assume that things become right by virtue of the fact that they are doing it. Another sign that you don't have any principles is that you tend to throw your own friends under the bus a lot, because that's what people without principles do. And I want to give you a couple examples of this because I think it really helps to expand our understanding of this topic. And the first example takes us to the nation of Sweden. Sweden has a well-deserved reputation for being the feminist capital of the world. They are so, oh, thank you so much. They are so feminist in Sweden, you could hardly believe it. If you have a business in Sweden, not only do half your employees have to be women, half your board has to be women. If you form a government in Sweden by law, and I think they're the only country that does this, half the government has to be women. It doesn't matter who the people voted for. Nobody cares about that. What matters is that half of everything's got to be women, because Sweden is the feminist capital of the world. And then, just recently, a really funny thing has happened. Sweden has become one of the rape capitals of the world. They have the highest rate of forcible rape on the entire continent of Europe, and it's even worse than that sounds. They're competing, last I checked, with Zimbabwe, South Africa, and Lesotho. How does that happen? How do you go from being the feminist capital to the rape capital in the blink of an eye? And the answer is they invited in 2 million migrants, mostly from the Middle East, who are perpetrating all these crimes. And this is not my idle speculation. Recently, the Swedish government commissioned a study to figure out what was going on here, and I, for one, have not seen a statistic, I don't think, this lopsided in my entire life. They concluded that 95% of the perpetrators were immigrants. Only 5% were native Swedes. And in fairness, when that report came out, the Swedish government took immediate action. They immediately passed a law making it illegal to do any more studies of who gets convicted of rape. Who says government can't solve problems? We won't see any more reports like that, because now the reports are illegal. But the question that I hope you're asking yourself is, what about the women who are the victim? Doesn't the feminist capital of the world care about the women who are the victims? And the answer is, they used to care about the women. They like the Islamic immigrants better. They have moved on. The best way to think about this is that the women were their old crush. The immigrants are their new crush. They moved on. Now, I want to give you a second example, which is different, but I think you'll see the parallel, and this is something that's been happening in the United States right now, and I know you know this story as well as I do. This is the whole issue of women's sports. And someone's going to write a big, comprehensive book about this, because if you think about it globally, it's really fascinating. Up until very recently in the history of the world, nobody ever heard of any such thing as women's sports. Women's sports is a very, very modern idea. The ancient Greeks had the Olympics 3,000 years ago. It was exclusively male. Now, the ancient Greek historians tell us that 3,000 years ago, a woman disguised herself as a man, snuck into the Olympics, and apparently won something. And when they found out, they changed the rules to require that going forward, all athletes would have to compete naked to make sure that it would never happen again. Which shows us a couple things, including that the ancient Greeks seem to have had a better grasp on fundamental human biology than a lot of American college professors today. And for the next 3,000 years, there were no women's sports. Not till the 20th century, and slowly at first kind of picked up steam after a while. And I think it's a good thing. It's healthy, it's competitive, different sports for different people. What could go wrong? Well, apparently what could go wrong is the idea that men who claim that they're women and aren't get to compete in the sports on the same terms as the women, which is absurd because men and women are different. Something that everybody understood up until about 10 minutes ago. Women's hips are designed to give birth to babies, which, let me say, is a neat trick that I can't do. Men's hips run faster. Nothing wrong with it, just the way God made us. Nobody to complain to. I always say that if women could run faster than men, I might have never gotten married. So there we go. You know, I made that joke last year in Oklahoma, and somebody said, oh, you would have gotten married, you just wouldn't have 6 kids. So it's all how you look at it. But the point is that men and women are different, and if you put the men into the women's sports, they will inevitably drive the women out of their own sports. How does the left feel about women being driven out of their own sports they used to champion? And the answer is, it's just like Sweden. They used to care about the women, they like the transgender people better, they've moved on. Old crush, new crush. The left is like the worst spouse ever. The minute somebody new comes along, they're like, bye-bye, honey, it's been great, but I found someone new. I'm heading on down the line. I will tell you something which nobody else will tell you, and that is that the left will throw the transgender people and the Islamic immigrants under the bus also. As soon as they find somebody new they like better, and I guarantee they will, it's the very essence of who they are. Ask the Israelis. But I think at this point, I'm probably leaving you with something of a mystery. You're probably saying, well, he's telling us there's this big, scary, dangerous force in our country, and indeed the entire Western world, and then he's telling us that they don't believe in anything at all. And they don't. And you're probably saying, wait a second, if this isn't about anything at all, what are we even talking about? What is this thing that's not about anything? And I'm glad you asked, because it's a cult of power. They want power. They want power over you. And they don't particularly care how they get it. And this is the hardest thing for conservatives to understand, because conservatives don't think this way, but they don't particularly care what they do with you once they have the power over you. That is a detail to be worked out later. Every time I explain this to a room full of conservatives, someone always says to me, yeah, well, what do they want the power for? They don't know what they want the power for. They just want the power. They have no idea what challenges you will face in your life going forward, but they are certain that they will have the correct answer for your challenges, and you will have the incorrect answer for your challenges. And we see this exact phenomenon if we look historically at left-wing governments in power. A Stalin, for example, or Mao, or Castro, or Newsom. You know, pick your left-wing dictator, they're fairly interchangeable. I'll go with Stalin, okay? Stalin would wake up one morning and he would say, you know, I had all the peasants over here working on this project, but you know what? I changed my mind. I've been thinking about it, and this project over here is a better. Tell the peasants to stop working on this one and come over here and work on this one instead. So the peasants are going to move over, because if they don't do what they're told, they'll be shot and thrown in a ditch with the other peasants who didn't do what they were told. So they're going to come. And maybe the next morning, Stalin wakes up and says, oh my goodness, I thought of something even better. Forget both of those. Come over here, work on this project. You understand? That's a detail. What matters to Stalin is that he has absolute control over everybody's life, and nobody has any control whatsoever over their own life. That is the goal. And if you think I'm exaggerating, I will challenge anyone to tell me any detail of your life so small, so remote, that the left wouldn't try to control it if they could. Shall we start with the food you eat? Can you cook what you eat on a gas stove? How about what car you drive? Are you allowed to drive a car at all? How you raise your children? Are you allowed to have children? What gets injected into your arm? Tell me the detail of your life the left wouldn't control if they could. I bet you can't come up with anything. And usually someone will say to me, you know, there's socialism. They really like socialism. Surely there must be some kind of a principle behind socialism, isn't there? And this is worth a minute, because an alarming number of our fellow citizens think that socialism is just a dandy idea. It actually means a lot less than what most people think that it means. Socialism is a surprisingly simple concept that has only two moving parts. There are two ingredients to socialism. The first is that somebody out there has a vision about your life, which is, by the way, the second big difference between the way conservatives think and the way leftists think. Most conservatives will tend to daydream about what they would like their own life to be like. Leftists daydream about what they would like your life to be like. And their left is daydreaming about you right now as you sit here, and we're halfway to socialism already, because that's the first half. The second half is that they believe they're entitled to use force, the force of the state, to force their vision on people who do not share their vision. And that's the other half. And you could say, well, what entitles them to do that? Well, in the left-wing worldview, if you have the vision, if you are the visionary, that inherently entitles you to use force on the non-visionaries. I wish it were more complicated, I really do, but it's not. The reason that Bernie Sanders is a socialist is he has a vision of what he would like your life to be like, and if he has the force of the state behind him, he will shove that vision down your throat. You know who else was a socialist? Hitler was a socialist. He was the head of the National Socialist German Workers' Party, which sounds socialist, but let's take a closer look. Did Hitler have a vision of what everybody else's life ought to be like? Yes. Why, yes, he did. Okay. Did he believe that he was entitled to use force to force the vision on people who do not share the vision? Yes. Well, yes again, and that's it. We're out of tests. Hitler was absolutely a socialist, and I want to be very careful and clear here. I am not telling you that Bernie Sanders and Hitler have the same vision. I'm sure they don't. Sanders is Jewish. I'm sure he doesn't share Hitler's racial vision. That's not my point. My point is not that they have the same vision, but they both have a vision. Different though it might be. In both cases, their vision is about other people's lives, and they both believe they're entitled to use force to force the vision on people who do not share the vision. In those three areas, they're absolutely on the same page. And if Bernie Sanders were here in this room with us right now, what would he say about what I just told you? Because I know exactly what he would say. He would say Hitler's vision was bad, and my vision is good. Correct. Promise he'd say that, and that's fine, but what if Hitler were joining us tonight at the Torrance Airport? Well, what would he say? He would say Bernie Sanders' vision is bad and my vision is good, so there. And that's kind of a microcosm of our future under the socialists. When the socialists win, they will immediately start fighting with each other. They always do, because they don't actually agree on that much, except they all really like power. And we and our children and our children's children will get to spend the rest of eternity living at the whim of whichever socialist ends up on top of the socialist big pile and wins the right to impose their will downward on everybody below. And again, the historical evidence on this is easy enough to find. You know, in the Cold War era, the two big socialist countries on earth were the Soviet Union and China. Were they friends? No, they hated each other. They despised each other. At one point, I learned this recently, the Soviet Union asked the Nixon administration if he would mind if they nuked China. That was like an actual diplomatic question. They hated each other because they couldn't, because no one was big enough to dominate. Now the Soviet Union would have said, well, we've got these allies in the Warsaw Pact in Eastern Europe. But they weren't friends, they were being dominated because socialism is all about domination. So if you're with me this far, you understand this battle we're having in our country is not between our principles and their principles, because it can't be, because they don't have any principles. We're in a battle over whether we want to live in a country that's based on principles or a country with no principles at all. Do you know what happens when your country has no principles at all? It's ruled by force. That's the only thing left if you don't have principles. It's simply a matter of who's got the biggest stick to beat everybody else down with. As it happens, our founding fathers were really big believers in principles. Principles that apply to everybody all the time. I've already mentioned that we find a lot of these principles in the Bible, and we do. You know where we also find a lot of them? Constitution, that's right. Just chock full of principles that apply to everybody all the time, which is why the left hates both the Bible and the Constitution, because it's the exact opposite of what they're about. Although they will quote individual lines out of either the Bible or the Constitution to win the argument they're in at the moment while ignoring the rest of the document. Why is it, do you think, that they do that? It's because they don't have any principles. So, really serious question. There is a second half to this talk. It is really, really late. It's been a long day. You want me to go straight to the conclusion, or you want me to go out and do the whole thing? We could put it to a vote. I could leave the room, and then after the box.
What character?
Another 5 minutes of others great?
Okay, so five minutes means we're ending it.
Yes, with all due respect.
Okay, you got it. Invite me back sometime and we'll talk about the second half, which is applying this to various things going on in our country. But I will wrap up and tell you really quickly about the books I write. Years ago, my friends said you should write a book. And I did, and it was the wrong book. Everyone thought I was going to write a 500-page tome about economics, but I had an epiphany that people don't read 500-page tomes about economics. So my first book was called The New Democrat. It's a parody history of the Obama administration done as the Cat in the Hat. I'm guessing everyone's read The Cat in the Hat. It's like Cat shows up uninvited at this middle-class American home. What's he do when he gets inside? He wrecks the place. That was kind of like Obama. And then he's got these two friends, thing one and thing two. Do you remember? They became Pelosi and Reed. And I realized I was writing the first history of the Obama years, all done as the Cat that. And I got my first book review, Salon.com, said that this was the most twisted piece of conservative propaganda print matter out there. Wow. And I was to write my second book. Who's read The Lorax by Dr. Seuss? It was a movie a couple years ago. Dr. Seuss was a huge leftist, lifelong member of the American Socialist Party, of course he was, and his children's books are filled with socialist lessons, and The Lorax was his environmentalist book. It's about an evil capitalist called the Onceler, who cuts down trees and makes consumer goods, and we are taught that that is bad, bad, bad. He drives the trees to extinction. He wipes them out, they're extinct, there's no more trees, and his factory probably goes out of business because there's no more trees. And I read it to my kids, I said, does that make sense to you? Do you think that capitalists destroy species that their business depends on? Do you think that Colonel Sanders is going to drive the chickens to extinction? Can I see hands on this? Who's worried that Colonel Sanders is going to throw every last chicken into the fryer and then they'll be extinct and we'll never see another chicken again? I think it's exactly the opposite. I think Colonel Sanders cares more about the survival of the chicken species than anybody on the planet, including the chickens. He's got billions wrapped up in this. There are going to be more chickens if he has anything to say about it. And I'll tell you something else. There are more chickens alive in the world today than ever before in history. Do you know why? It's because we like to eat them. That's why. The greatest thing that ever happens to a species is the human beings like to eat you. This is like winning the species lottery. So this was a book that very much needed parody. Mine is called The Gorax, because it stars Al Gore as the Lorax character, and it's about how America used to be free and prosperous, and then the environmentalist wackos came along and started driving everybody out of business. My original title was going to be The State of California. The Wizard of is obviously a parody of The Wizard of Oz. My first thought was that Bill Clinton made a really great wizard, because you recall the original wizard is a fake. He's a Charlotte Soul spoken, as I thought Clinton did perfectly. When they first meet him in my book, they say, "Are you the Wizard of Is?" He says, "It all depends on your definition of Is." Hillary is the Wicked Witch. And do you remember the Cowardly Lion? I replaced him with a Cowardly Rhino. Who suspects the Democrats are wrong, but he's too scared to do anything about it. He's looking for the courage to do something useful when he gets to Washington. To think that I saw it on CNN Live is about the media and Trump. It's the Trump story through the eyes of a pathologically dishonest media, which you may have run into very well on your own. Motley Click is an interesting book. I wanted to do something about the whole critical race theory, identity politics world that we're living in. So the background story here is Moby Dick. Motley Click. It's a seafaring book. It's about a ship full of social justice warriors, and they hire for diversity, so they very carefully have selected a crew with one of everybody. There's a black guy, Jewish guy, Muslim, Asian, gay, Mexican woman, transgender, Indian, lesbian. And they're all out hunting for the great white racist. But they end up catching each other. They keep finding these flaws in each other's wokeness. It's a very ironic story about how the anti-racists of today are like the most racist people you're ever going to meet. The Fisherman's Husband is a parody of the LGBTQIA plus minus divided by sign movement, based on The Fisherman's Wife, which is a classic fairy tale about pushing things too far. It's my story about how the gay rights movement started 50 years ago with some people who said we're gay and we would like to not get beaten up because we're gay, which is awfully reasonable, I think. And then it moved to, we need civil union so we can visit each other in the hospital. And I'm thinking, you can visit anybody you want in the hospital. You don't have to be married to someone to visit the hospital. But whatever, we had civil unions. And then, surprisingly quickly, the civil unions were no good anymore. Because now we need marriage equality. Man and a woman, two men, same thing, kind of. Marriage equality is what we needed. And then, it moved to, you need to bake a cake for our wedding. You don't have a right not to bake the cake. We will make you bake that cake, and your kids will be taught about all of this in kindergarten. And if your kid's kindergarten teacher decides that your kid was born in the wrong body, he's off to the operating room. And if you have a problem with that, you're just a bad parent. This has gone from reasonable to insanity over the course of 50 years, which is what my book, The Fisherman's Husband, is all about. And that takes us to Camelot with a K, is a parody of the Biden administration done as the King Arthur story, with Biden as a kind of a senile King Arthur. It's also my first musical. In this one, the various characters break into song throughout. So, for example, Nancy Pelosi sings a song I wrote called Speaker of the House, which is to the tune of Master of the House from Les Mis. This is where half the room says, "What's Les Mis?" And the person next to you will help you with that. Hunter Biden sings If Daddy Were a Big Shot, which is to the tune of If I Were a Rich Man from Fiddler on the Roof. And Dr. Fauci sings I Am the Very Model of a Scientific Scientist, which is to the tune of I Am the Very Model of a Modern Major General from Gilbert and Sullivan. That's for those of you who didn't think Les Mis was obscure enough. And several other original songs. So we got 7. I actually have an 8th, which is in production. We are currently expecting it approximately May 1st. And it can be ordered. My 8th book is called Pedagogio. It's based on Pinocchio, and it is a parody of the public school system. Those of you in California will recognize much of the details I'm thinking. So these are fun, unique gifts for conservative people, if you happen to know any. And I brought the 7 books with me, and I said the 8th one you could order if you like. I've got the 7 books over here. They are fun, they are unique. They're not in any store anywhere, so whoever you get them for, if they haven't met me, they've never seen them before, I promise. And it helps me do what I do, which is to travel the country and share these thoughts with nice folks like yourself. So potentially, this could be like a win-win-win situation. Checks and credit cards and debit cards are fine, along with several other payment methods, which I didn't even know existed until my kids explained them to me the other day. So there's all kinds of ways we can do that. I'm happy to autograph them if you like, and I'm on the table here right under the TV over on this side. And thank you guys so much for sharing your meeting with me.